Clive Finlayson is director of the Gibraltar Museum and one of the world's foremost experts on the behavior of the latest Neanderthals. He took me into Gorhams Cave at the base of the Rock of Gibraltar, and in the back of the cave, where some of the most interesting evidence of late Neanderthals have been found, we had a conversation about how Neanderthals were fitting into their ecology and what factors may have led to their disappearance. We're here in the back of Gorhams Cave, and this is the place right now where we have the most recent dates for Neanderthals anywhere in the world.
That's right. Mm-hmm. It came as a surprise to us.
Yeah.
Back in 2005, it was published in 6.
Uh-huh.
We weren't looking for late Neanderthals, we just decided that this part of the cave had never been excavated before.
Yeah.
And we went through a series of levels. There's 4 levels here, identifiable. The most recent one at the top is Phoenician, Carthaginian.
Yeah.
Then you've got a Neolithic level, then you've got Upper Paleolithic, represented by Magdalenian and Solutrean, and below you have the Neanderthal level with Mousterian. And we came across a hearth in that corner down there, like the ones you've seen outside, that kind of, but a real structure, a structured hearth. So we decided to radiocarbon date. So we sent some from the different parts of the hearth, some charcoals for dating. And when the results came back, we thought, no, this is wrong. Precisely because they looked very young.
Yeah.
So we just kept quiet about this and came back and took more samples and did it again. And the same results came back.
Yeah.
And we're still working in this level and other things. We're trying to use other techniques as well to date the level, to strengthen that information. But we're very confident that what we have here is, at the time we published it as 28,000 years ago, those are uncalibrated dates because the calibration curve for that period was not available. Now it is. So basically those dates now translate to around 32,000 years ago.
Yeah.
That still makes them the last known Neanderthals to have lived on the planet. It doesn't mean the last Neanderthals lived here necessarily.
Sure, yeah.
But it's where the evidence is. And, we think that this reflects a refuge, a coastal refuge that probably stretched from here to Portugal, which had a lot of advantages, promoting late survival and also survival of many other species. This cannot be seen out of context.
Right.
In ecological terms, lots of species that later on recolonized Europe, parts of Europe, literally survived through the glacial periods in this part of the world.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of strong evidence from pollen, from marine mollusks, from the fauna, that shows that even at the height of the glacial maximum, when Britain was 2 kilometers under ice, and the build-up to that, which is when the Neanderthals go extinct, you might have that. You don't find a single woolly mammoth here. You don't find a reindeer. Nothing representative of cold fauna reaches this.
Right.
And they're close by, but they're not here in the coast. And yet you have olives growing, and you have all the species which are indicators. Hermann's tortoise, which needs 17 Celsius annual temperature to reproduce, they're still here. Yeah. So this idea of a refuge fits in with this late Neanderthal survival. But we found it here, and then we started to think, well, why was this place so important for the Neanderthals' location? Because the dates weren't just 32, they go on to 33, 34, 35. So they keep coming over and over and using this fire. Now, for a start, most Neanderthal sites, I think the hearths tend to be like the entrance of Gorhams. They tend to be on the outside. You don't want to smoke in your rock shelter or your cave.
Sure.
But here they do. We're quite deep in the cave here.
Yeah, we're probably 100 meters from the entrance, longer maybe.
Well, there's a significant difference distance. I mean, maybe 50 to 60 meters at least. But you can see the light even now comes into the back of the cave.
Yeah.
Why would you put a fire here? Well, it's the narrowest point in the cave.
Yeah.
So that might give you a hint. And what would happen to the smoke? Well, if we go look right up, there's like a natural chimney.
Yeah.
So the smoke would have risen that way.
Yeah.
So it would be a good place, with hyenas roaming up there and leopards and all kinds of wolves, to retire to, even if your activity is outside, retire to at night, light the fire. Yeah. You're not going to smoke yourself in, and you're protected. Yeah. But it looks pretty confined in here for a group. But of course, it wasn't like this, because if you look in there, this is what Captain Gorham found in 1907. That you need to crawl through. Geraldine did it many years ago. I haven't actually gone to the end because it's extremely narrow. But what we're doing is excavating down. And that goes on for 35 meters. Yeah. Another 35 meters. Yeah. So there would have been a huge chamber here where the Neanderthals would have had relative comfort and safety. So we think that's the story. But the story doesn't end there. You know, if we forget Neanderthals and modern humans, the taxonomy, just think of people.
Yeah.
What happens? Well, these early people, the Neanderthals disappear one day, they don't come back. Later on, after a break, other people come, Solutrean, modern humans, as some people would like to call them, people, and they do almost the same, because look, we haven't excavated yet, that structure there is a hearth, is a camphor, you can see bones there, a little rib of a rabbit or something.
Yeah.
So they're putting a fire almost in the same position, probably for similar reasons.
Yeah.
And if you crawl to the back of the cave, it's very exciting, because what you find at the back there is, so far, there's a painted stag, beautiful, like the ones you would see in northern Spain and France, and two hands, you know, these negative, what people have then with you know, in the children's hands, on charcoal.
Yeah.
And we haven't published this yet, but there's no mystery to this, but we took a sample from that, and it gives a date of 20,000. So 20,000 years ago, the Solutreans came, replaced the Neanderthal, or came after the Neanderthals in some way, and we're almost doing the same thing as the Neanderthals were doing before them.
Just the context, right? 20,000 years ago, the last glacial maximum. You've got the same situation as had recurred, you know, again and again with Neanderthals. And again, you've got people down here. They're using this because it is a kind of place where people can live.
And when you look at, for example, the profile of the bones that come out with cut marks, the species compositions and so on, the shellfish, you know, the mollusk that Darren's been looking at, the plants that Gerald's been looking at.
Right.
If you looked at the modern human level, shall we say, and the preceding Neanderthal level, and you weren't told which it was, there is practically no difference. The correlations are fantastic. You know, the variance explained is close to 90%. I mean, you couldn't tell the difference. Maybe the paintings on the walls. Other than that, you couldn't tell the difference from the fauna and the processing of life.
They're different traditions. They're different peoples, you know. Even if Neanderthals contributed to later people, they're far apart in time. They're not information inheritors of the Neanderthals necessarily, but they're ecological inheritors in the sense that they're using the same stuff.
I mean, they may have had different fashions, cultural differences, which we sometimes confuse for biological differences. After all, you know, we're talking of thousands of years later. But faced with similar ecology, these solutions are going to be very similar. And essentially, they go out, look out of the window, and they have a choice, and they exploit that choice in a very similar way. And I think that when we look at past interpretations of subsistence strategies, Neanderthals versus modern humans and so on, very often we are confusing context with taxonomy, or with the phylogenetics, if you like. And very often what you see, the differences have more to do with the place and the way things are exploited, rather than who they are. When you come to a place like this, where the context changes little, the taxonomy changes, but the way of exploiting the environment is very similar.
So with humans, when we talk about human biology being a combination of genes and environment, we could also maybe extend to say, when we look at human behavior in the archaeological context, it's not only a combination of genes and environment, you know, and psychological systems and so on, it's also very particularly the microenvironment. Around this site, there are certain kinds of activities that make sense, and you see those sites being used for that reason.
It sounds deterministic, which I suppose it is up to a point, but it's more about having a choice and exploiting that choice as an intelligent hominid. And very often you're going to be doing similar things because the choice is there available to you. So you're able to but by and large, the ecology tends to, in some way, guide you, and it's the larder. You've got a larder out there, and it's like at home. You know, you open the fridge, and you have certain things, and one day you might choose one, might choose another, but you're going to be eating what's in the fridge or what's in the supermarket. So it's similar.
So why are we not Neanderthals? You know, what accounts for the fact that Neanderthals had their time, and then later you see different kinds of people here?
Yeah, I mean, some would argue that there's an element of Neanderthals in us still today.
Well, there absolutely is, right?
So
everybody watching this is going to know my attitude.
So that argument would mean that Neanderthals didn't disappear. But I think we would agree that the phenotype
That's it, yeah.
of the Neanderthal is no longer around.
That's right. That was a population that had its day. And its day ended. And that, I think, is so fascinating to people, obviously. But in a way, fundamentally, this place is maybe the most information we have anywhere about it.
I mean, the point is, why did they disappear? Well, we assume, maybe from present-day genetics, looking backwards, that our species was successful, but how many of our populations never made it, like the Neanderthals never made it, for similar reasons. So to what degree has this got to do with being good or bad, or simply the luck of the draw?
Right.
I think a lot of it had to do with the luck of the draw. I'm a great believer that chance events in small populations can make a difference. And I think these Neanderthal populations had been hit hard across the continent over and over again by climate change to a large degree. Altering their habitats, altering their way, the kind of environments that they were good at exploiting, until you ended up with a series of populations, maybe one here, maybe one in Portugal, maybe one somewhere else, maybe one in Siberia. We don't know. And the point is, it's like pandas or tigers. Once your populations reach such low numbers, even if the conditions are good out there, you're living dead. You're going to go extinct purely for genetic reasons, inbreeding or numbers. Your numbers are so small that one of these random fluctuations and you're out. And there's no recovery from extinction. Once you go below zero, then that's it. Or you reach zero.
It's what we call an absorbing state.
Absolutely. But there were other populations, and one of those happened to expand, or a series of them expanded and colonized certain parts of Europe and made it through that particular stage. I don't think we need to look further than that. I think there's a huge element of that. You have a lot of populations of people, some with the characteristics of Neanderthals, probably with their morphology better suited to sort of kind of ambush hunting in the kind of environments that we had outside Gorhams Cave. Maybe they weren't so good as large-scale roaming over the open steppes, treeless steppes. Maybe there was a mechanical or constraint there, or energetic constraint. Maybe some of these other people, maybe coming from the plains in Africa or somewhere, were, I hate to use the word adapted, but their morphology was better suited to large-scale roaming. And at a particular time when open steppe habitats were spreading, they reached all the way to central Spain. I mean, you get Saiga antelopes, which you have to go to Central Asia to find the evidence of them there. Well, they were just tracking resources, kinds of resources and a way of life that these other people. But the story here shows you something else. When those people used to exploiting these open plains and so on come to this kind of environment, they adopt the Neanderthal way. So there is that flexibility as well. Context again.
Now, before we leave this part of the cave, I just want to ask about the Carthaginians, because this cave is, has continuously been open to the outside, and people have used this cave throughout the ages, and in particular in historic times. So we're famously on one of the pillars of Hercules, and there were rituals going on in here.
This is the exciting thing. When you start working here at the very top, the most recent level, we've got it very well dated. It starts in the 8th century BC. Through to the time of the Romans, the 2nd century. And people are coming here. First it's Phoenicians from present-day Lebanon, the Eastern Mediterranean. They're coming all the way here. And then the Carthaginians, they set up their descendants in Carthage near Tunisia, in the Western Mediterranean. And it seems that, this is one of the columns. The other one is in North Africa. It's very visible. It's the end of the world. In theory, because we know they're going across. So you have to make offerings and worship. A lot of intact ceramics, a lot of votive offerings, scarabs, showing an international dimension to the cave. At the time, of course, the sea level is where it is now, so they were beaching their boats and coming up. But you find Corinthian, Athenian ceramics. You find some of the scarabs with Egyptian hieroglyphs. So it's from, it's a shrine to the gods, possibly Melkart, the precursor of maybe Heracles, and eventually Hercules. So the columns may have been initially a Melkart. But I see something here that also tells me about the human mind and how little it's changed the way we think. It's quite clear that the Carthaginians were going beyond the end of the world. it's quite clear that we're going and trading with the native peoples for metals and minerals.
Yeah.
There may have been an element of perpetuating the myth to corner the market and prevent the Greeks and others from going beyond the end of the world. So this may have a greater significance than the purely spiritual and religious, but that's my take on it anyway.
They were like paleoanthropologists. We'll perpetuate the myth that things are very rare and we should keep them hidden so that we can have them. Yeah.
So anyway, so that's my take on it. But
Yeah.
but the fact is, it's nice to have a cave with, it's 18 meters in vertical of deposit we know so far. 16 and a half of those are Neanderthals.
Yeah.
Then you've got maybe another bit which is modern human pre and post glaciation. Then you have a bit of Neolithic, and then at the end of it, the little icing on the cake, that little thin layer, which represents 400 or 500 years
Wow.
of these people coming here.
And here we are living on top of our history, as we always do.
So this is our little time machine here.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
the nearest thing we've got to time traveling.
Okay, all right.